these levels of chronic stress in women lead to a plethora of diseases. We also know that women are disproportionately affected by autoimmune conditions, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, rheumatoid arthritis, fibromyalgia. How many men do you know that suffer from this? I grew up in a violent household. I have complex PTSD. It's post-traumatic stress disorder to the next level.
It changes your nervous system. It changes your cortisol receptors. It changes all of that response. No one on the outside can identify that you need to be rescued until things are really bad.
Meliza Mokrani
is a wellness entrepreneur, neuroscience-based coach, and trauma survivor redefining what it means to care for the nervous system.
As the founder of Worthy Self-Care Studio, she's created a groundbreaking space where science-backed tools like infrared sauna, cold plunging, red light therapy, and somatic healing meet the realities of chronic stress and trauma.
From her own journey through fight or flight survival to building a wellness movement rooted in resilience and recovery, Meliza now empowers others to rewire their stress responses, regulate their nervous systems, and reclaim their vitality.
Because healing isn't just about surviving, it's about becoming fully alive.
What is it you think doctors are not telling them when it comes to chronic stress, hormones, and their nervous system?
That's a really good question. I didn't really understand what...
Welcome back to the Dr. Brighten Show. I'm your host, Dr. Jolene Brighten. I'm board certified in naturopathic endocrinology, a nutrition scientist, a certified sex counselor, and a certified menopause specialist. As always, I'm bringing you the latest, most up-to-date information to help you take charge of your health and take back your hormones. If you enjoy this kind of information, I invite you to visit my website, drbrighten.com, where I have a ton of free resources for you, including a newsletter that brings you some of the best information, including updates on this podcast. Now, as always, this information is brought to you cost-free, and because of that, I have to say thank you to my sponsors for making this possible. It's my aim to make sure that you can have all the tools and resources in your hands and that we end the gatekeeping. And in order to do that, I do have to get support for this podcast. Thank you so much for being here. I know your time is so valuable and so important, and it's not lost on me that you're sharing it with me right now. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, or share this with a friend because it helps this podcast get out to everyone who needs it. All right, let's dive in. Many people are unknowingly stuck in survival mode. How can people tell if they're sabotaging their relationships, their lifestyle, their happiness in life?
Well, one thing I would suggest as a first place to start is really understanding your nervous system, understanding how that has implications on your reactivity, your emotions, your ability to self-regulate. One of the ways that I like to do that is through a trigger journal. Ooh. And understanding what your triggers may be. Right? So, hey, I had a disproportionate reaction to something, and that can come through your own self-awareness of you recognizing, like, I overreacted to something. Yeah. Or maybe a loved one gently telling you, like, yo, that was not cool. Right? And here's why. And taking that time to cultivate the self-awareness, having the courage to address yourself and understand, like, hey, why am I like this? Right? So by using a trigger journal, it helps you kind of cultivate that self-awareness. And it might seem painful for some people to go through this process, but it can help you identify, like, what was the trigger? Where did this come from? And what can I do about it? Right? And when you begin to understand these things about yourself, then you can make the necessary changes, whether it's to, regulating your nervous system and the stress responses that you're having, addressing trauma that maybe impacted those responses that you have, right? That programming that we all get from early childhood and into, our adolescence and adulthood. And also, help cultivate tools that can regulate you in the moment. So when you cultivate this self-awareness over time, you catch yourself. You start catching yourself. And that helps you mitigate those reactions, right? Helps you mitigate the self-sabotaging behaviors, the challenges in the relationships, maybe, self-sabotaging behavior in your work, right? Or in your parenting style.
Mm-hmm. What's a trigger journal and how does someone, develop that? I think the word trigger gets thrown around a lot these days. And you'll see people who are like, you shouldn't say something triggered you because it's not this extreme of like PTSD style. And yet I think there are things that trigger the nervous system that set things off. And that maybe we don't have a robust enough language to really like parse that out. But when people are using the word trigger, it's a sensation that something set me into this fight, flight, fawn, freeze kind of mode, the sympathetic overdrive. So what you're saying is we need to identify those triggers. We need to make a journal. Talk us through that because it's very hard in the moment to know what sets you off. So how can people identify it? And then how does that fit into this journal?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would start by addressing the notion of a trigger, right? Mm-hmm. A trigger doesn't necessarily have to be a negative thing, right? A trigger is just a stimuli, a catalyst, right? So it can trigger the sympathetic activation, right? Where you have the whatever response you may have, be it good or bad, right? Sometimes we need those necessary responses because your sympathetic nervous system is there to keep you safe, right? If that tiger's chasing you, it's there to serve and help you run, right? But a trigger can also help you shift into the parasympathetic state, that rest and digest state where relaxation happens, recovery happens. Now, I like to keep a trigger journal for both, right? Because it's important to understand what stimulates you in the wrong way and what stimulates you in the right way, right? So we can look at, to me, I just keep 2 columns, right? It doesn't have to be anything fancy, right? You have a journal that you keep for the day and you keep it with you. So make sure it's portable. Okay. I actually keep one in my backpack that's like pocket size. It's a tiny little moleskin.
Do you prefer handwritten over doing something like Apple Notes? Everybody's
different, right? You do whatever works for you. For me, I personally need the actual physical act, the kinetic, motion of writing to be able to like integrate. So on one column, you keep the activation, the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, sympathetic activation triggers. And on the other side, you keep the parasympathetic, the relaxation stuff. Take note of things throughout your day that make you feel triggered. And by triggered, that can stimulate a response of maybe your heart rate accelerated. Maybe you started feeling nervous. Maybe something terrified you and you got a little bellyache, right?
Yeah.
Keep note of those things. Keep note of the things that make you feel good. I had a really great hug with a friend, right? That like made me feel really good.
Yeah.
I had a good phone conversation with my sister that made me feel really good. Right? We have a tendency to get kind of locked into like the negative things that are impacting our lives. And sometimes we lose sight of the goodness and the joy, and part of being human. And I refer to like humanity a lot because I'm interested in being human.
Yeah.
And living a long human life that's filled with, a friend of mine always says life is filled with 10,000 joys and 10,000 sorrows. And I want to be present for all of them and understand them. So, keeping track of this, and over time, I like to, when I work with my coaching clients, I have them do a weekly review, right? And take note of thematic elements that show up in whatever triggers you're looking at, right? Maybe it's the sympathetic triggers and maybe you're focusing on that for, wherever you're at in your healing journey. And look at the themes.
Yeah.
And that gives you information, right? We can't heal what we don't understand. And in order to understand the dysfunction that is in our bodies, right? And in our emotional body and in our spiritual body, we have to understand where these things are coming from. And I think this is often the missing link in, total well-being and healing, but especially within the context of self-awareness is really like having nervous system literacy. That's what I call it.
Yeah. I think, one, this is a fantastic tool because you're being very mindful all throughout your week, throughout your day, and you're not just focusing on the negative. I am going to take this a step further because I love this idea. I'm like, I'm going to pick this up. I'm going to start practicing it, and I'm actually going to put it into a word cloud. So if people don't know what that is, you can take a data set of any kind. So, and so if you're doing this in digital form, this can be really easy to do. But if you're not, you can type this up and then you put the words, you can just Google word cloud. You put the words in there and it will actually give a visual representation of where things are at. I'm a very visual person, and it will show you in this, it makes, you know how clouds have like little lumps, little bubbles? It's going to do that. And so it will show you if you're disproportionately saying like, my mother-in-law, for example, I have a great mother-in-law. Just Kathy, if you're listening, I love you. But you know, if that's what it is for you, that bubble will be predominant. So I love this idea. And I'm like, oi, if I could take this and put it into a word cloud, it would show me, because I have a tendency, like a lot of women, to be like, it's probably not that bad. Maybe you're just focusing on putting it in that visual representation is a great way to mirror it to you. The other thing I love is focusing on the parasympathetic activation, because when you are in sympathetic overdrive, your brain doesn't work. Cortisol is like, all we're thinking about is not dying, and that's it. And so when you're in that sympathetic state, having a resource you can open up and look at and be like, what makes me feel good, is absolutely brilliant. Now, for people who are listening, they may not recognize when they're actually in that sympathetic overdrive. I think it's become super normalized. How can someone know their sympathetic nervous system is working overtime?
Yeah. You have such great questions. So my theory is that the vast majority of people are in some level of a sympathetic overdrive.
Agree.
I mean, you know, at my wellness center in Berkeley, you know, we serve thousands of people, and I can tell you that without fail, 99% of them are overstressed. Mm-hmm. And that's because we live in an unnatural way, right? We're constantly stimulated, whether it's by, you know, the gadgets that we have. It can be the work stress. It can be the stress of parenting. While parenting is remarkable and magical, it can also be a very stressful experience. It can be relational dynamics. It can be someone cutting you off on the road. It can be the, you know, geopolitical challenges and or, you know, societal challenges that we're facing today. And, you know, it can make the world feel like an unsafe place. And when there is that level of, or, you know, such a lack of safety, right? That activates and reinforces that sympathetic overdrive. Now, there's also the component of like our childhood development, right? The parenting that we receive, you know, if we've faced any adverse childhood, you know, events, right? Or any sort of traumas that may have impacted, you know, the way our brain functions and the adaptive, you know, qualities that our bodies and our nervous systems developed over time to keep us safe, but have perhaps become maladaptive, you know, later in life. So it's variable for every person, right? Yeah. Everybody has their own lived experience. Everybody has, you know, the landscape of the quilt of their life, right? And we're all weaving more into it as we live the lives that we're living. But one way to be able to understand that is like, okay, well, am I experiencing incessant anxiety?
Yeah.
Do I have sleep disruption? For women especially, right? What is your cycle? What is your menstrual cycle like, right? Because the capacity for disruption within the context of the menstrual cycle, that's such a huge indicator, right? When women develop amenorrhea or, you know, have irregulatory ovulation or, you know, ovulatory dysfunction, those are huge indicators that you might be in a sympathetic dominant state. Your hair starts falling out, right? There's also weight gain, particularly, you know, around the midsection. That's a common, you know, indicator. I would also say sleep disruption is really like pretty pretty telling. Insomnia, poor sleep quality. You go to sleep, you wake up not feeling particularly rested, right? These are indicators that give you information so that you can do something about it. And it might all sound like doom and gloom and, horrifying. And it's like, oh my God, I'm broken. I'm a testament personally. And, with all the clients that I work with, that you can shift it. You can create drastic, remarkable change in yourself. You have to have the courage to address yourself.
So you're not broken. Your nervous system is just dysregulated. How can understanding this one thing help people not just alleviate stress, but improve their self-worth?
Oh my gosh. Love that question. So your nervous system is intrinsically tied to your emotional response, right? It has an impact on the limbic system, right? You have your autonomic nervous system, which I'll break down the nervous system later. But
no, I think we should break down the nervous system right now. And then I'll ask you this question again. Because I'm like, I feel we started this conversation. I'm like, hold up, maybe people don't understand sympathetic, parasympathetic, everything we're talking about. That's my bad as the host.
Totally, no worries. Okay, so your your nervous system can be firstly divided into two sets, right? You have the central nervous system, which is the brain and the spinal cord. It's like the boss of the body, right? It processes information, sends messages to the rest of the body. Then you have the peripheral nervous system, which extends out of the, spinal cord and, the spine, and has peripheral nerves that dictate sensation and movement. Now, in the peripheral nervous system, that can be broken down into the somatic nervous system, which dictates sensations, right? The senses, taste, touch, smell, eyesight, hearing, but also it dictates motor function, voluntary motor function. So I'm raising my right arm, I'm lowering my right arm, right? And then you have the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system is really kind of responsible for the involuntary involuntary actions that happen in the body, such as blinking, rate of respiration, heart rate variability, blood pressure, and digesting food, to name a few. And the autonomic nervous system can be broken down into three categories. You have the sympathetic nervous system, which is responsible for fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. This is those moments where there's a perceived threat. And this is a system that's there to keep you safe, right? It shunts, blood away from your midsection and your digestion and sends it into your muscles and dumps glucose in your muscles so that you have the capacity to run and escape the tiger chasing.
And can you explain fawn to people? Because that's a much more newer concept to this.
Yeah. It is. It's interesting because, there's different ways to explain it, but my understanding of it and my personal experience of it is like, it's almost a people-pleasing behavior.
Yeah. And who does this most? Women. Yes.
It's almost a people-pleasing behavior. It's like, I have to please you to keep myself safe. And
which is sometimes a very valid survival mechanism.
They're all useful. That's the thing. Like, it's not the enemy, right? These are all useful things that help us stay safe and keep us safe. I don't think it's a bad thing. I personally, as a child, fawned a lot because I grew up in a violent household. So yeah, that's a pretty typical one. And then you have the parasympathetic nervous system. That's the rest and digest. That governs your ability to relax, your capacity for athletic recovery, right? Recovering from exercise or, whatever stimuli you experienced. And that's an important component, right? The two balance each other. Now, the third component of the autonomic nervous system is the enteric nervous system, and that governs your digestion. for the sake of the conversation, we'll focus on sympathetic and parasympathetic because the enteric is kind of intrinsically tied to those two.
Yeah, especially people just hearing rest and digest.
Yeah.
Sometimes I feel like sympathetic and parasympathetic, they're sometimes like always bullying the enteric nervous system.
Yeah,
like,
100%.
It's our priority.
Yeah, 100%. And it's contingent on those two and where they are, like where the activation is. So that's kind of the breakdown of the nervous system and its functions. Now, whenever I explain, the impact of the nervous system on the body to people, I always think of a marionette doll, right? And it's kind of holding the strings, right, above the body. And it has this cascade effect. It can affect your hormonal balance. It can affect your cognitive function, your rate of respiration, your heart rate, your blood pressure, your capacity for athletic recovery, your motor functions, your digestion, your immune system. I mean, it's really the king. So when we look at total well-being, we have to consider this, right? We have to consider stress. Stress can be such a significant culprit in the manifestation of disease and dysfunction in the body. And I always, feel that it's important to break down stress when considering the nervous system, because you have, hormetic stress, which is the good kind of stress that we dose our bodies with for, in short spurts, for short periods of time for long-term benefit, right? That's exercise. That's cold plunging. That's heat exposure. That's, holotropic breath work, right? But there's also chronic stress. And chronic stress can be defined as, prolonged exposure to a state of stress, right? That is due to ongoing pressures or threats as opposed to short-term challenges. Now, stress is part of life, right? And in order for us to truly be resilient to the short-term challenges that we face that feed our growth, right? That give us the opportunity to be better as we get older and as we learn and we become wiser, is that, we need to have that stress resilience. If you're experiencing chronic stress in your life, your stress resilience will go down. And if you're a woman, and this is the thing that, 87% of my clients are females.
Yeah.
So if you're a woman who's cycling, right, your stress resilience goes down every month during the luteal phase of your cycle. If you're a menopausal woman, your stress resilience tanks when your estrogen tanks, because estrogen is so remarkably protective of stress, right? So
you mentioned holotropic breath. There's a lot of people who have never heard that before. Can you explain what that is?
It's not my favorite kind of breath work.
Oh,
as a recovering person of sympathetic hyperactivation.
Yeah. Let me just say, I actually, the first time I did holotropic breathing, I was at a Mind Body Green retreat, and they had Guru Jagat there, leading us through it. And it was wild. It was wild. And I remember that experience, and I was like, if people could do this, why would they ever do drugs?
Yeah.
Because the experience is so euphoric. Yeah.
Yeah. So it can, holotropic breathing is like a very forced and controlled sort of breathing. There's different techniques for it, but it's really, intended to activate the sympathetic nervous system. It's characterized oftentimes by short inhales and short exhales. It's that animal breath. It's also, considered fire breathing, right? And the reason I'm not crazy about it is if you have someone who does not know how to breathe or doesn't know how to manage that response, it can send them over the edge.
There's a lot of people who have had panic attacks that have reported negative things. And I really love the way we were led through it, because it started with we were doing essentially box breathing. Then we started expanding the exhale more. And so the entire first session was working on understanding your breath, getting into parasympathetic. And then we were like, okay, now we're going to go into this exercise of holotropic breathing. And the way it was explained to me, because I was new to it, was If you go from 0 to holotropic, you are going to send somebody into a panic attack where sometimes they're even paralyzed. Their nervous system is responding where they're breaking down in tears. Like they're in a complete panic because their nervous system has identified that death is imminent. Whether or not that was actually happening, I want people to understand, even with just your breathing, you can teach your nervous system that you are under the threat of death, and your nervous system wants survival at any cost.
100%. I think, bringing that consciousness, right? These are all mindfulness practices, right? The trigger journal is a form of a mindfulness practice. Understanding your breath is a form of mindfulness. It's cultivating that self-awareness to understand where you're at. Right. So, the responsible way, as you know, which is what you experienced, is to bring someone through, you know, a series of stages of breath work before you go into that holotropic breathing. And then once you get to that peak or the climax, which is the holotropic, you also have to bring them back down the hill, you know, and help create safety and calm and understanding, that you're okay, right? You can breathe. Holotropic breathwork can create, you know, euphoric experiences. Some people have visuals. A lot of people can have their trauma triggered, during, you know, these breathwork experiences. I've experienced that myself, you know, where like midway through, I'm crying hysterically, not because I'm thinking I'm going to die, but I'm having such a strong visual of something that happened to me, and it's breaking my heart. And you have to be in a good place to be able to go there, right? You have to have an understanding, and also the importance of having a guide. I cannot stress this enough. A skilled breathwork facilitator, not one of these charlatans that you see on Instagram. You know?
How do you identify a charlatan on Instagram when it comes to breath work?
Oh gosh. They're usually, actually, I don't want to talk shit.
But I think it's really important, because I am of the mindset that we don't need more censorship. We need to teach people how to critically think, because it's slippery slope with censorship, right?
100%.
And I always want to be cautious. And sometimes people are speaking their truth, and it's true for them, but it's not true for you. And that doesn't need to be censored just because there's no scientific consensus about the experience they're having. So I'm very cautious around that. And yet at the same time, I want my audience to be able to identify, like, what are red flags? Sometimes the red flag is like, I will say this in the perimenopause, menopause community, is you've got a 19-year-old fitness trainer who's telling you it's not your hormones. Don't make menopause an excuse. You can do anything. And this girl has never experienced the estrogen deficit that causes substantial inflammation, pain in your joints, causes visceral adiposity, so belly fat to accumulate, which leads to insulin resistance. Like, she doesn't even know that exists. She's never experienced that. And yet she's telling women, what's true for me at 19 is true for you at 50, and you need to stop making excuses. Red flag, red flag. People for years had, like, I was in my 20s and people were like, please, please, please make menopause content. And I was like, I feel like torn about that, because yes, I have the knowledge. Yes, I manage menopause. Yes, I prescribe hormones and all this. And at the same time, I wouldn't want to be in that stage of life and have this 20-something telling me what it's like. I'm just like trying to be like, walk that line of being very respectful. And so I don't think that age necessarily has to be the barrier, but when I think you haven't lived enough and you're telling people who are decades ahead on the road before you that you know their experience better than them, that's a good time for you to be quiet. Stop. So we want to talk about, like, what are the red flags when it comes to, like, breath work and people telling, because there are people, I think they have good intentions. They don't have enough knowledge and experience to know that they are crossing a line and a boundary. So for somebody listening, how can they identify that and keep themselves safe?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, the relatability component is so critical, you know, within the context of any, like, health, whatever journey that you're on, right? Like, I might be relatable to you as a nervous system, you know, health coach, right? I might not be relatable to John Doe because of my background and who I am. So that does matter, right? That matters in terms of even finding a provider, right? Like someone who's going to be able to address your health. I would probably be more likely to want to come to you given, our similar backgrounds and our life stories, as opposed to wanting to go to someone else, right? So relatability is important, but from the standpoint of safety, a basic certification is critical. Most breathwork facilitators will name what certification they've performed. Yeah. Look into it, see if it's accredited, try to understand, who came up with these theories. Do your due diligence, right? An investor isn't going to invest in a business without getting into the data room and doing their due diligence. And you should consider that within the context of your health as an investment, right? And then one thing I also see a lot of is, when there's like not enough scientific evidence and too much of the woo. Don't get me wrong. I love the woo.
Yeah. And we can't study everything, but I think I know what you're saying. And the fact that what I find it is the outlandish claims of like a cure-all, or this is the one solution, or saying that, based on this one study that like, therefore this is fact. And it's like
utterly unscientific.
Yes. And it's like, we can respect that science is so immature. I really think people need to understand that science is in its infancy. The medicine that is practiced in the United States is in its infancy. When you look at something and you compare it to Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, like a lot of these other medicines that Western medicine has said, like, has no efficacy. No, now the research has come out. And then it's funny because then you go see a medical doctor that's like, I got a weekend certificate in acupuncture because there's research on it. And I tell patients all the time, if your medical doctor did not dedicate 4 years and like an internship residency to Chinese medicine, just because it was just just because it says a gallbladder point doesn't mean it's affecting the gallbladder. As part of my training, we did have to study Chinese medicine, and we had the opportunity to do a dual of going down the route of Chinese medicine. I never thought I could do both and do it well. Like, I should refer to someone else who's dedicating their life to that. But they taught us enough to respect it, to understand our limitations and how it works so that you can make that referral. That's a little bit of a digression, but just to say, on your point, I do want to echo checking people's credentials. It's a big red flag for me when someone says they're a doctor, but they don't say what kind of doctor they are. There are literally weekend certificates or online programs where you earn a doctorate and then they act as if they can practice medicine, which is false. I hate that this happens because I think it's really difficult and dangerous for the consumer. I had a woman the other day who came on and was saying all this stuff. And she's like, well, I have a PhD. And I was like, well, excuse me, what is your PhD in? Your handle on your social media, nowhere is your real name listed. I can't vet you. I can't look at, she was so mad at me for asking. And I was like, want people to understand that's a red flag because anybody who has legitimately earned their credentials, we are not going to be upset that you ask for them. No. We worked hard for them. We're very proud of them. We're going to give them to you. So I think it's really unfortunate. And for people to understand that if the person has a medical license, there are boards that make sure that they're following the law to a T. I can't step out of line. I'm also a rule follower, so I wouldn't. I would have anxiety about that. But if you're not licensed, then nobody's really governing you. So as a naturopathic physician, which is how my license reads, there's a lot of people who will impersonate what I do. And they're like, well, I'm a naturopathic doctor. And when you ask them more about it, they've never even studied anywhere. They're just calling themselves that. And because they're not licensed, nobody's checking up on them.
That blows my mind.
It's wild, wild west out there. Breathwork's not regulated. And I think people think breath work is benign. Everybody breathes. So therefore it's not a problem. But I always say to people, and everybody drinks water, but if you do too much of that, or you do too much water after dehydration, you could find yourself in critical care in the hospital. Like just because this is a natural, normal thing we're all doing doesn't mean there aren't consequences when you step out of normal parameters. And I think holotrophic breath, for example, is outside of normal parameters, and we have to be cautious with it. Not that it doesn't have power, just like cold plunging, right? You think about fasting. All the women, all the biohackers are like, fast like us. I should be like, write a book that says like, do not fast like men. Please don't do it.
Yeah. I mean, I think scope of practice is really critical. You know, I mean, this is a challenge I face with, you know, and I think this is something that social media has really perpetuated is the charlatans of the bunch. You know, you'll see chiropractors acting outside of their scope of practice, right? And making claims around whatever, you know, it could be around fasting, it could be around gut health, and, you know, they're wearing a stethoscope around their neck, and it's like, that's not really your scope of practice. And there's so many people out there that are phenomenal experts in what they do. There's, you know, licensed, board certified naturopathic, you know, and you're board certified in endocrinology, right? You know, there's so many people out there, you know, go find them. Don't just stick with the Instagram or TikTok influencer. And it can be really dangerous. And also costly, because a lot of these people charge exorbitant amounts of money for their services, and they may not be fully qualified. So, you know, just do your due diligence, and be mindful of that. I will say that, you know, like I said, the breathwork community is starting to, there are accreditation programs that are accrediting, you know, different breathwork trainings. So, you know, you can research that. Google. ChatGPT is always great for finding resources on that.
I love that you bring up ChatGPT, though, because I think ChatGPT is not a place to get medical advice, but ChatGPT is a place to educate yourself further on something. Like, my doctor said this, what does that mean? And like, you can help refine questions and say, like, what should I ask my doc based on this? What should I be asking my doctor? What kind of lab should I ask them? And I really love that people have access to that tool. I want to talk about adverse childhood events. You brought that up. You also brought up that you had a very stressful childhood. I am curious, you know, you're Algerian. Do you think there's a cultural component to that? Because I ask that because I come from chancla culture. All my Latinas will know. And anyone who has seen Encanto understands that, like, I was Luisa. Like, when you're the oldest child, you don't have emotions. You carry everything for everybody. You make sure that everybody's together. You are the second mother in the house. And like, if you do not perform your duties or you step out of line, the chancla, for people who don't know what that is a flip-flop. You're like madre, might be like chucking that across the room at your head. These things literally happen in our culture, and it's really only in newer generations that we see people stepping away. So with that context, I'd like to understand more, like, the cultural component. Talk to people about what ACE scores are. And then I want to get into, like, how can people start to heal their nervous system from childhood up?
Well, first of all, thank you for sharing that. The chancla culture it's real. It's universal. In Algeria, it's like the pentufa. Yeah. You know, and mom has great aim with that.
I know.
It's like
Kobe could never.
Yeah. She can hit 3 kids all at once, you know, in one shot. To answer your question about, you know, culture, yes. The short answer is yes, right? There are, different understandings, right, of how to raise children. And those vary around the world. There's also, you know, being raised by immigrants, right?
Yep.
My parents experienced unimaginable terror in their lives. My father, you know, had to become the breadwinner of his family at 13 when his dad died, right?
Yeah.
He left Algeria at 17 and went and worked on Italian ships and as a deckhand, and then he worked in the galley making coffee, right? And that man worked himself to the bone, and he had tremendous survival tactics, right? He was so resourceful, and that resourcefulness came from a lifetime of distress. You know, at 18, you know, he was home visiting his family. A bomb dropped on his house.
Oh my gosh.
You know, and he survived it and had a broken femur, was in the hospital for 3 months, right? Like, talk about resilience. Went to culinary school in France, became a very successful chef, traveled all over the world, settled in Napa, and did really well for himself in Napa. My mother, you know, grew up during the Algerian War for Independence, a very, very brutal time when the French, you know, who had occupied Algeria for 132 years, were dealing with, you know, all sorts of guerrilla warfare tactics, but they had taken every male, adult, and adolescent to prison, right? My mother is the youngest of 10. She grew up without her dad and her brothers, and really only met her dad a couple of times before he died because
oh my gosh,
he was tortured so much that he developed a cardiac issue. The French, if you don't know, are extremely brutal in their torture tactics and were electrocuting men by their testicles.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and that happened to my grandfather. And he developed a cardiac issue. They let him out of prison. He died 3 days later.
Oh my gosh.
And so, you know, and then the violence, right?
Yeah.
My mother endured unbelievable levels of violence in her life from her sisters, from neighbors. She endured sexual violence. And it's a miracle that she had the capacity for kindness and for goodness. The flip side of that.
Yeah. Well, I want people to understand that what you just identified are several ACE scores, more than several ACE scores. Having a family member that goes to jail, sexual assault, abuse, like there's many things. So your parents were set up for nervous system dysregulation.
100%.
And for people to understand that if that's not resolved, this is not to blame moms at all. If that's not resolved, the dysregulation of the pregnant woman imprints the dysregulation on the fetus, subsequent baby.
100%. There's the epigenetic component that goes even beyond the mother, right? It goes to the grandmother as well. Because if a grandmother is pregnant with a female fetus, right, and every female is born with all the eggs that she'll ever have, that actually impacts multiple generations.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, both of my parents experienced horrifying things, you know, and I feel so honored that they made the decisions that they made to come to America and to live out the American dream, right? They were the two hardest working people I've ever met in my entire life. And I know that they wanted the best for my siblings and I. And like you, I'm the oldest daughter. And with that comes great responsibility and duty.
We're very much the Spider-Mans of the house.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
With great power becomes great responsibility.
Exactly.
I'm a Marvel nerd.
I've become one through my son. And so, you know, the expectations, right, that are the implications of those expectations, you know, I had, you know, to get straight A's, I had to be the best at everything I did. My father used to always say, you must always be the best at anything you do. And he would always give me this story of being the only Arab in his school because my father's family was more well off. And so he went to to school with the French kids. And he talked about the racism that he experienced. And the only thing that saved him was that he had high marks, high scores. You know, they also had a lot of corporal punishment. So he got in trouble for the dumbest things. But, you know, he'd always be like, you have to be the best at what you do. That was drilled into my head. And then, of course, my mom had this unrealistic expectation. She had a tremendous insecurity around the fact that she was not educated. And her number one goal in life is like, my kid's going to go to the best universities and she's going to be the best at this and the best at that. That resulted in, as a child, being really overcommitted.
Yeah.
Right. So, you know, of course, academic excellence was one of them, and having no help, by the way, right? Because my father worked a lot and my mom was insecure about being uneducated, but still had this expectation that, oh, you're going to get straight A's, but you're going to do it on your own.
I was blown away in school when I learned that other people's parents helped them.
Yeah.
So I was also had the same, my childhood is very similar in the expectations. You know, having come from a immigrant family, the expectations are just, I mean, through the roof, because they worked so hard to get you to where you are. And so that's not lost on me either. And yet I just remember doing a science fair project and kids were talking about how their parents helped them. And I just remember having this moment of like, wait, everybody's getting help at home. Like, I'm expected to get these A's and these grades. I have to make honor roll without fail. Like, in our small town, they would put it in the newspaper. And so, like, you know, every parent would check who is on there. I look back at that and I was like, that is one of the most psychologically draining things that ever happened. Like, I have to be in this newspaper because everybody will know if I'm not. You know, but just to your point about all of that type of stress is almost, it's more matched to the stress that's put on adults to perform in their careers.
Yeah. I mean, that's where it starts, right? It starts with the parenting, and it's intrinsically tied, at least for me, it was, to my worth, right? If I didn't perform well.
As you say this, I'm like, it's still intrinsically tied to my worth. Yeah. This is something that I've been working on.
You know, I'm a work in progress as well. You know, I'm still healing, and I'm committed to that for the rest of my life, right? I didn't have the childhood I think I deserved, right? And it wasn't all bad, but I have to, one of my favorite yoga instructors always says, you're undoing a lifetime of doing. And so that's where we have to have patience and grace for ourselves through that journey. But, you know, this is where these unrealistic expectations, that pressure that we put on ourselves, and of course it's reinforced by society and what society thinks is
if you're always producing, then you're winning, right? Like, and you always get that positive reinforcement. I'm curious. So through what your parents experienced and what through you experienced, how did these, you know, what get categorized as ACE scores, but these traumatic events or stressful experiences, what do they do to a child's nervous system?
Creates a tremendous amount of dysregulation. And, you know, the first way that you'll see it manifest is in behavioral issues, right? You may notice shutdowns. You may notice the opposite end of the spectrum of where there's, you know, outcries for help and meltdowns and, you know, etc. It sets your nervous system up for those adaptive behaviors becoming maladaptive later in life, right? The things that we have to do to keep ourselves safe. You know, I can give you the example of my upbringing. Not only did I have those expectations of perfection, there were serious consequences. You know, I grew up fearing for my life. From
the two people who are supposed to love you the most. Yeah. I can relate.
Mostly from my mother. My father was just absent, you know, and I have to have compassion for him. You know, one of the things that comes from like understanding this stuff and really like having the courage to face it is the difference between the conceptual compassion, where we can identify the challenges that our parents faced and we can intellectualize it, right? And say, oh, their life was hard, therefore it makes sense. But having true heartfelt compassion is a totally different thing. And that can only come through you having compassion for yourself.
So do you feel like having that compassion is part of the healing and actually can lend itself to more parasympathetic activity?
Giving yourself grace, having compassion for, maybe what happened to you and that it wasn't your fault. I experienced violence, from my mother, and I'm not talking about a spanking or smack on the butt. I'm talking about like prison beatings. And, I have complex PTSD from those experiences.
For people who don't know what that is, can you define that for us? And I want to say, I know this is a very heavy conversation and you're sharing all this with us, and I don't want to seem insensitive as I interject the things to make sure our listeners are on the same page.
No, it's okay. It's just, it's post-traumatic stress disorder to the next level. You can experience triggers. Excuse me. I can tell you triggers that I experience is if I see a parent physically disciplining a child or being too physical, I have wanted to beat them myself. When I hear a child screaming, like that high-pitched shrill, I freeze. And I immediately feel like this cascade of like pins and needles come over my body, because it reminds me of when my mother would have these fits of rage and I would hear her hurting my brother and my sister. And, even talking about it makes me want to cry, because it's such a cruel thing. So, again, understanding these triggers, understanding where these things come from for me, was really integral into being able to do something about it. Yeah. Right. Understanding my trauma. And the thing that I was not, trauma informed for most of my life. Right. What does trauma informed mean?
That's a very new concept. I think most people listening to this probably heard that term, if at all, in the last 5 to 7 years.
Yeah. And thank God. Thank God we're talking about it. I didn't really understand what trauma was. And I love how Bessel van der Kolk, who is, a remarkable trauma researcher, and he wrote the book, The Body Keeps the Score, how he defines trauma, excuse me, as total overwhelm. The experience of total overwhelm of like, my God, and if that happens repeatedly, right, to a child, or in the early years of life, that can create dysfunction in the nervous system. And in my case, not only did it happen repeatedly, it was unpredictable.
Which is the number one way abusers get conformity out of their victims, is to keep it unpredictable, because then you never know when the shoe's going to drop. So that lends itself to the chronic people pleasing that you were talking about. And as you were talking about, it changes you at a physiological level. The brains of children who even just get spanked, which people are very flippant about that sometimes, but even just that actually will change a child's brain and the way their nervous system functions. That will change the way their cortisol is responded to and how their cortisol operates through their whole life. So not even the extreme violence you're talking about, but what some people believe is, their right as a parent to punish their child by inflicting pain. There is research to back up that it may very much shorten the lifespan of that individual's life because of the way it changes their nervous system and their hormones. So I think that's really important for people to understand that piece, but also understand that there is healing that can happen through this. And that thankfully the brain we have neuroplasticity. It can change. Yeah. It's adaptive, right? We used to think like anything that happens, that's a forever state. You know, having something like so post-traumatic stress disorder, for people to understand, I think the best models that we actually have of that are people in the military. Mm-hmm. And there's been extensive research on that you go through a traumatic event and it changes your nervous system. It changes your cortisol receptors. It changes all of that response. You will always be primed for fight, flight, freeze, fawn. And this is not your body betraying you. This is your body saying, when I was in my formative years, as I've learned, I need to be primed to go into the major sympathetic stress response so that I can survive. So I'm sure you're going to talk a bit about your healing journey, but for people who are listening to this, how do they start to take the first step towards healing?
It's multifaceted.
Yeah, of course. The healing is never linear and it's never one thing. And as much as like some of medicine has convinced us there's a pill for it, there's just not a pill for everything, or really anything can be healed with a pill alone.
Yeah. I think it comes down to good old fashioned hard work. Mm-hmm. You know, are you willing to do the work? That's the first question. Right? Have you had enough suffering in your life? Have you created enough challenge for yourself? Because at the end of the day, you know, what happened to you is what happened to you. But you're an adult now, and you're living the life you're living, and you're making the choices you're making. And you have the capacity to change that if you don't like them. Mm-hmm. It's a harsh reality to have to face,
and I think, just for people listening, I think that's very different than if you're currently in that cycle of abuse, that cycle of trauma, just to differentiate that out, because it does sound harsh. I think if you take it from that context of like, but I'm
100%
currently in a situation where like maybe I'm experiencing domestic violence, you don't have the capacity to heal, right? Because you are completely in survival. So we're talking about a different situation here.
Yes. And that actually ties into my experience and that wake up I had. But, it comes, you know, first and foremost, you got to start with the will to change. Mm-hmm. Secondly, get yourself a trauma-informed therapist, right? That's going to help guide you through the journey. I have the best therapist ever, who's amazing and has tolerated a lot of my garbage, but she's guided me in really beautiful ways, because healing is hard. Mm-hmm. And my philosophy is that if you're going to do something hard, you should do it with intention and with support. Mm-hmm. Anybody that tells you that they did it on their own or they climbed the top of the mountain by themselves is full of shit. I'm sorry. That's not real. So find, you know, a supportive therapist. And if therapy is not within, you know, your access or your reach, find a good friend, you know, a safe person that you can trust that also has the capacity to support you through that. And then I'd say, you know, take the time to cultivate that self-awareness, mm-hmm. right? Because you can't heal what you don't understand. And when I finally had the courage to address myself and had the space to do so, right? When I was no longer in that cycle of abuse, the healing happens fast. Mm-hmm. It's amazing how much the shifts happen quickly. And then also have a sense of faith. You know, it's not linear. The process, you know, is like, you might swirl around and then you might go up and then you might go down and you might plateau, right? It's not a linear journey and you have to be prepared for that. But I also think it's phenomenally rewarding. And for me personally, to go from a space of thinking I was broken, thinking that I had some sort of, pathologized predisposition to depression, that I was never going to be happy, to go from that to a place of I can feel joy, and I can be present to like the wonder and beauty of this life, because that's what it's about, right? Yeah. And I get emotional talking about it because I'm so inspired by it, and that's within us all, that we all have the capacity to access that experience of what it means to be human, that it can be like remarkably beautiful.
Mm-hmm. I think you put your tissue over there.
Excuse me, I'm so sorry.
It's okay. I just realized, I was like, oh no, the tissue's not there. Sitting for so long is not good for our butts. For people who think self-care is all you need to fix your stress, why won't bubble baths and deep breathing be enough?
I love talking about this. So bubble baths are great. I love me a bubble bath.
Unless you get a UTI.
I was going to say, part of the reason I don't take them so frequently is they're not good for me.
Yeah.
But, if that makes you feel good, again, this goes back to the trigger journal, right? Like identifying the things that feel good to you. You should do those things, but those cannot be the only things, right? Mm-hmm. Having a face mask, or facial, right? Going for a massage.
Yeah.
Massages can, if you're in like a triggered, like stressful state and you go for a deep tissue massage, what happens to your muscles when you're stressed out?
Yeah, I probably have some right now because I was flying this week, but you get hypertonic. You get, for people who don't know what that is, if you've ever had someone touch your shoulders and they're like, oh, those are like a rock, or maybe you even have trigger points, right? Like there's knots in those muscles and the nervous system is just very angry in that concentrated position.
Yeah. So what happens when you go get a massage when you're in that state? Your body's not going to receive it, right? Mm-hmm. In fact, it may exacerbate it. Mm-hmm. People are always shocked to hear that. They're like, I just want a deep tissue massage because I have this tension. I'm like, the last thing you need right now is a deep tissue massage. You need to go get in a sauna and like switch into the parasympathetic state and maybe get more sleep, maybe take something off your plate. So I kind of stress the importance of science-backed self-care. That's, my studio, Worthy Self-Care Studio. That's everything we do. Everything we offer is focused on science-backed self-care. So we use modalities that are going to create an impactful shift in your nervous system, whether that's through infrared saunas, whether that's through a guided cold plunge, whether that's through compressive lymphatic therapy, right? Or lymphatic drainage, right?
Which is actually how we met. Because my lymphatic drainage practitioner in Paris introduced us.
Yeah. And to Honey, she says hi, by the way. Oh, she's a dear friend of mine. So, but yeah, or, using red light therapy, right? So integrating science-backed self-care is important because it does have to have a purpose.
So what does red light therapy do for stress? Like, how is that helping?
Oh, it's so delicious. I love it. In essence, what red light therapy can trigger is a shift into the parasympathetic state. Mm-hmm. It can also reduce inflammation, which is often a byproduct of chronic stress, right? And chronic sympathetic activation. It also supercharges your mitochondria, right? Which when you're exposed to long-term chronic stress, your mitochondrial function becomes impaired, and you really need your mitochondria to function appropriately because it's integral in every single cellular activity that happens in your body. It's integral to every organ system in the body. So,
and for women to understand, one of the most concentrated tissues of mitochondria in your body is your ovaries.
Yep.
So if your mitochondria ain't right, your hormones ain't right.
Exactly. So, red light therapy is phenomenal. I also like to use it towards the end of the day as well to kind of help trigger the melatonin production. You know, I turn off the lights in my house and have red light bulbs, because I'm a bit of a freak about light. And it helps kind of signal to my brain that, you know, it's time, it's almost sleepy time. And it helps me wind down and feel more relaxed. I also like to take, you know, electrolytes, before I go to bed, you know, not too close to bed because then I wake up.
Oh, really?
But, having adequate hydration is really great for the reparative processes that your brain undergoes while you're sleeping. And I actually learned that from a dear neuroscientist friend named Matt Walker. So.
Oh, yeah. I know Matt.
Yeah.
And I love that you bring up the hydration piece because people, you know, when we talk about the adrenal glands, people are like, oh, cortisol. They don't understand antidiuretic hormone comes from the adrenal glands. And so chronic dehydration, which a lot of people fall under because because there's doctors out there that are like, just drink when you're thirsty. And it's like, okay, can I tell you how dysregulated everybody is, how disconnected people are from their body? Like, I have to like have I drink out of mason jar so I can like track my water. But if you are not getting enough fluids through the day, the adrenal glands have to mount a response to that. And because they are also involved in your stress response, it can be a strain on your adrenal glands, and it is going against that healing process. So I love that you bring that up. I'm a big fan of drinking electrolytes. There's lots of great electrolyte brands out there. I'm also like, you can make, you know, basically the mother brew of pink Himalayan salt. And if people don't know this, it's basically like, take a hunk of pink Himalayan salt and you can fill it up in like a gallon thing of water, let that set for a few days, and then you are taking spoonfuls and adding it to your water. So there's a lot of different ways. I like to give people other tools than like being like, you have to buy this expensive brand. Like there's, you know, other options out there. So we talked about the red light therapy. We talked about hydration. You mentioned that you're using saunas. I'm with you, like before you go for deep tissue, because sometimes we store things, unresolved emotions in our body. And when you start releasing things, it can bring up trauma, which is why it's so important to have that counselor, have that therapy. I talk about pelvic floor physical therapy all the time. I don't think I talk enough about how when you have that release in your pelvic floor, things can get stirred up. Often people think like, oh, only if you've had sexual trauma, but not realizing that really, metaphorically speaking, the pelvic floor is basically like the net, right? I think about like we're tightrope walking all the time. And when we fall for whatever reason, the pelvic floor is there catching us. And so it's catching like when things don't go our way, when things hit us. So that's a little bit of a digression in all of this. But I want to come back more to the hormones because women are burning out at alarming rates. What is it you think doctors are not telling them when it comes to chronic stress, hormones, and their nervous system?
I think doctors have the best of intentions.
And only so much time.
And only so much time. And they also lack, oftentimes, the awareness of their own nervous systems. Therefore, they can't practice or they're not practicing what they're preaching, right? They may give you like some, handout about stress and, lowering stress, and you might want to take up yoga, right? I remember like my mom, who, especially during her menopausal years, was, very dysregulated, and could not understand how to calm herself down. Like just did not have the capacity for it. And I remember her doctor telling her, oh, you should go to yoga. I thought that was the dumbest thing, to offer this woman, maybe get her some therapy, maybe, teach her about her nervous system and the rest of her body. And, unfortunately she wasn't totally receptive to those things, and I would try to talk to her about it. But to answer your question, yeah, I mean, the burnout component of things is real. We know that these levels of chronic stress in women lead to a plethora of diseases. We have, the highest risk of developing cardiovascular disease, which is significantly linked to chronic stress. We also know that women are disproportionately affected by autoimmune conditions, right? Mm-hmm. Hashimoto's thyroiditis, rheumatoid arthritis, fibromyalgia, right? How many men do you know that suffer from this?
Mm-hmm. I do know some, but that's just by way of who I am in this world.
I don't know any, but they do disproportionately affect women, and that's because of stress responses. And then we talk about hormones, right? It creates a significant hormone imbalance because what happens is stress steals your hormones to produce cortisol, right? And that can create a significant imbalance, whether it's through estrogen dominance, or it can also be too little estrogen at the same time, right? Mm-hmm. Or at a different time, depending on the person and the manifestation of that. So, what can women do is create lifestyle changes, right? Mm-hmm. One thing I'm a big fan of is boundaries. Mm. So when to shut off work mode is one, right? Because I also think that we have to consider the societal implications of what it means to be a woman. I'm a single mother, right? I own 3 businesses, and I'm also a best friend and a sister and a community member, and I'm a human being. Mm-hmm. And I struggle, even despite what I do for a living, yeah. I also struggle with finding balance, so having boundaries around what you're going to interact with, consciousness, right? Setting a timer to turn off work mode, right? Not interacting with toxic news cycles or anything. Again, this goes back to the trigger journal, right? Anything that creates an overwhelming stress response for you. Mm-hmm. For me, I had to sign off from news. I read the news once a week just so that I can understand current events, but it's not something I consume every single day because it's very distressing to me because I am a very empathetic person, mm-hmm. and I care about humans. And it can cause me to freeze.
There's an Instagram account called So Informed. And for people who are how could you possibly know what's going on in a week? They do a weekly roundup of news you may have missed, and they go through all of it. And I've found that account has been really helpful mm-hmm. in the weeks where I have to shut off the news. And you can feel guilty about that too, because you're I have to stay informed. I have to know what's going on in the world. I can't just be an ostrich with my head in the sand. And yet I think we also have to recognize that it does not benefit you, your family, your community, or society if what you're consuming is leading to you burning out.
Yeah, you have to, as the old adage goes, you have to put your mask on before you put on, mm-hmm. Your child's mask or anybody else's mask, right? It's also a really amazing way that you can self-preserve. And that is important for your survival, mm-hmm. And your longevity. Think of these acts as, little deposits into the longevity piggy bank, right? And the more you decrease your stress, the more you have the capacity to be present to the joys of life, right? Mm-hmm. And, we get fed this information that we have to be these responsible citizens. And while it is helpful and important to be informed about what's going on in the world, I'd say, number one is you.
Yeah. Well, sometimes people feel that selfish. And I want to go back to your analogy that we hear every time we get on a plane. Your mask goes on first, your child second. They don't just say that so that you make sure your child's mask is on, right? Like you don't want to lose consciousness. They say that because no one on that plane is going to look after for your child the way you're going to. And that's the part I think people miss, is that no one else is going to look after your child, look after your mother, look after your friend the way you're going to. And so you absolutely have to take care of yourself first to have that capacity to do that. And I really think it's important that, especially as women, we start reframing that. It's not just like, oh, because like it's important so that I can make sure their needs are met. It's because you're the one who is going to be most impactful in your community's survival. So we need you. We need you firing at full cylinders.
You need you.
Yes, absolutely.
No one's going to save you.
This is true. Well, hopefully they will. Hopefully you have some people that will. But when it comes to, what I think you're saying is that when it comes to your own health, you're the only one living in your body. Mm-hmm. You know what's normal. You know what's not. No one on the outside can identify that you need to be rescued until things are really bad. Really bad. Mm-hmm. So you have to step in. You have to be present, like you were talking about with the trigger journal, and you have to step in and step up for yourself. I want to ask you, for people right now who are like, I am not getting sleep, I have no energy, like stress is robbing me of my vitality, what are like 3 tips that you would give them in that arena?
Yeah. Train up the parasympathetic nervous system.
Okay, how we do possible. It.
So 2 of my favorite ways are through heat exposure and cold exposure, contrast therapy. So not only does heat exposure, I'm a big fan of infrared saunas because of how they heat the body. For those of you that don't know what an infrared sauna is, it differs from a traditional Swedish or Finnish sauna in that it uses infrared heat, which penetrates your core body temperature. It raises the core body temperature by 1 to 2 degrees, mimicking a fever. And that, sets off a cascade of events in the body where, your immune system is doing its thing. It's detoxifying to the body, through sweat. But it also lowers your blood pressure and engages the parasympathetic state. And as you build that heat tolerance, usually 20 to 30 minutes is good. Mm-hmm. As you build that heat tolerance, it's kind of remarkable to see the shifts in your nervous system where your baseline is calm. The other modality I really love is cold plunging. Mm-hmm. I created a method called the Worthy Method of guiding a cold plunge, and it's rooted in a somatic body scan, which helps you kind of connect to your body, which, as you mentioned earlier, a lot of people are disconnected from their bodies. Yeah. So it's an opportunity to scan the body, right? This is a therapeutic tool that's often used in somatic psychology, where you start from the tips of your toes and you work up to the crown of the head. I like to integrate it with a lot of love and a lot of gratitude, because our bodies are remarkable, like magical machines, right? And they're complex, beings, if you will. And how often do you wake up in the morning and put your feet on the floor when you get up out of your bed and say, thank you, feet. Yeah. Thanks, toes, for all you do for, in every step I take in the world, right?
Before you put your heels on and hate them.
Yeah. It's not me, unfortunately, but
yeah, I'm just making
God
a joke
made me
here,
tall
guys.
for
You've
a
seen
reason.
me in heels. That's true. You are tall. I'm vertically challenged in life.
I know. I think sitting down, I look a lot shorter because I'm all legs, but I'm 5'10".
No, we took a photo together. I remember, and I was like standing between you and your friend, and I was like, wow, sometimes I forget, like I joke. So my brother is like over 6 feet tall. He's like a whole foot taller than me. And like, I feel for some reason in my mind, I'm his size and he's built like a linebacker. And so I'll just like forget like how compact I'm riding around in life until I'm next to people who are taller than me. And then I'm like, oh, look at me. I'm so small. Like, I'm a munchkin. I'm like, the lollipop guild over here.
But you know what? Your personality is
yeah, maybe
big.
That's what it is. And I want to get back to your okay, so you were talking about the Worthy Method and you integrate this with cold plunging?
Yes.
Okay.
So, you do a somatic body scan, and then, we take a moment to really set an intention, because going back to the point that I made earlier, when you do anything hard, you should do it with support and with intention. And cold plunging is freaking hard.
Yeah. You have to be very present in your body. And I think next to birth, that might be the only thing that has demanded surrender from me. And I really love it and enjoy it. You know, you don't necessarily enjoy it in the moment, but you have to just surrender to the sensations in your body. Not if you're like, oh my God, I'm going numb and I think I have frostbite. We're not talking about that. That's extreme. I'm talking about like, this is cold and it's uncomfortable and I acknowledge this. I accept it. I surrender to feeling the discomfort rather than trying to fight it.
Yes. Yes to all of that. Surrender is such a tremendous key in all of this, especially when understanding stress, when faced with challenge, right? That can feel overwhelming.
Yeah.
You know, surrender is a really powerful tool. I don't think it's a mistake that, you know, a lot of faiths around the world call for surrender, right? Surrender to a higher power or what have you. And that can guide people through some really challenging moments.
You feel like faith is a very important component in healing your nervous system?
Not for everyone, but for me, it has been.
Okay.
It's helped me believe in myself better by surrendering to something beyond myself. And I've had many instances in my life where I've been brought to my knees. And I think the reason I survived was because I surrendered. And I think, you know, something that you said also about, you know, the act of like, I'm experiencing discomfort. This is very cold. I am safe. I am safe, right?
Yeah.
That's something that we say to our clients a lot of times because our cold plunge is very cold. We have Morosco Forge cold plunge, which I think is, you know, the best one on the market. They produce their own ice. They're extremely hygienic and grounding, and but they get very cold. Ours is set to 36 degrees. And we often have to tell people when they're having that activation moment, right, during their cold plunge, that you're safe. This is uncomfortable. It's temporary, but know that you are safe. I'm here with you. And as we're, you know, when we're guiding people through that intention setting moment, right, we always say, I'm here to be your guide and your witness. I will keep you safe and I will make sure that nothing bad happens to you. This is so important to communicate to people. I can't tell you the importance of it. I also, you know, the reason I created this method is because I did trainings in a number of different cold plunging modalities, and I found that it was more dysregulating for me than anything to have someone screaming at me with a stopwatch.
Oh, I know. That's so dumb. Like, I'm in a major stress response and then you're in my face. Like, I'm somebody that my default mode is fight. So you don't want to do that with me.
I want to punch you.
My nervous system, like, and it's, I'm like, my husband has learned, not to scare me in the dark. He used to think it was fun until he got socked a few times. And then one time, he jumped out when I was coming out of the bathroom and I grabbed the door jambs and I pulled up my foot. I almost kicked him in the chest. He would have flown down the stairs. And I'm like, you have to stop doing this. Like, I'm going to tell this other story because he would be like, I can't believe you didn't tell on yourself for this. One time he walked up behind me in the store and he grabbed my butt and I turned around and instantly grabbed his throat. And he was like, what? And I'm like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Like, this is how I'm programmed. Like, that is my initial response. And I'm always like, I think as a woman, especially because we're not supposed to be like that, right? I always am like so mortified. So anyhow,
it's a superpower though.
I very much let people know though, like, if you do that, if you want to battle, like, don't push me too far because I'm not a freeze. I won't run away. I will engage.
Yeah.
And I have, because of some genes that I have, which they're termed the warrior genes. Fantastic. We're still living in tribes, like on a plane or something, but like I clear my cortisol very slow. So once you get me in that mode, I'm like,
The come down is hard.
and sometimes I'm like raging and I'm like, I'm sorry. It's just like, I got to go do jump squats now. Like, I have to move this energy
I got
out.
to dump it out. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyhow, that's I digress, but I'm sure there are people who can relate to like, I don't want to be screamed at. Like, it's also, it's silly.
It's dysregulating. You know, I'm very sensitive to someone raising their voice given my upbringing, right? Also like the seeking, I find that to be very egoic. And that's also something that I believe is associated with the masculine.
What's the seeking? What do you mean?
Seeking to hit a time.
Oh, yeah.
You know, because that takes you out of your body and out of the present moment and into your ego. And that's not where you need to be when you're sitting in 36 degree. You know, there needs to be an ego dissolution.
Yeah.
So, you know, making sure that what I love about the worthy method, I'm a little biased because I'm great at it, but, is that it brings in a little bit more of the feminine. So, you know, once you set your intention, we seal it off. And throughout the experience, we're also incorporating different types of breath work. And this helps calm the nervous system. I cannot tell you how many times we've had people that are pacing back and forth in front of the cold plunge and, you know, they get diarrhea of the mouth, as my dad used to say. They're just like, I'm so bad at this and I can't tolerate cold. And, are you going to be here? Oh gosh, can this be over? You know, it's like, and then you guide them through the somatic body scan. You guide them through the breath work. You guide them through the intention setting. And by the time it's time for them to open their eyes and face the water, they're like, okay, I think I can do this. And then when we facilitate the plunge, we do so to music. It's very intentional music. So there's no timer anywhere in sight and it engages the auditory senses, right? Which when we listen to beautiful music or inspiring lyrics, that can be very regulating to your nervous system.
Is that a tool that people could be incorporating daily?
100%.
Okay.
Yeah. Listen to beautiful music that inspires you. Dancing is also another one that I really love. And then, you know, once they're in the cold plunge, what happens oftentimes to people when particularly when their ribs hit the water is they have a hyperventilation response. Happens in about 70% of the population. Right?
Yeah.
And that is not good. That's not good for signaling safety to the body. So we always let people know that the way to get out of that is to exhale. Think of the inhale as the sympathetic activation, the exhale as the parasympathetic. And they both serve a purpose, right? But they also need to be balanced. And so when cold plunging, I always recommend inhaling for 4 counts, exhaling for 6 counts.
Why is the longer exhale important for people to understand?
Because you're in a stressful situation.
And what does the longer exhale do?
It activates the parasympathetic nervous system. And this is a tool that you can use in any stressful situation, right? Is connect to your breath, inhale for 4, exhale for 6, right?
And trust, friends, if you can do this in a stressful state like cold plunge, it makes it, you actually build the neuronal pathways that say, I'm in a stress response. I'm going to go into my deep breathing. So it's one way you can train yourself to have a better stress response.
Exactly. We call it stress resilience adaptation. So you can create stress resilience in your body. Now, once you get through that threshold of that first 30 to 45 seconds of the cold plunge where your body's like, oh shit, I'm going to die. Right. And if you regulate your breath, it's the most beautiful thing to watch. I mean, it's such a privilege to witness people experience this, because it's the point at which people surrender and they go from this tense experience to just being like, and then they connect to their breath. And that's where the magic happens. the hands-on coaching becomes not so hands-on. I like to, when I see someone has found a good rhythm with their breath, I may invite them to seal their lips and just do nasal breathing. Sometimes I like to incorporate humming because humming helps stimulate the vagus nerve, which also cold plunging does, right? But it also stimulates the pleasure response, right? What happens when you feed a baby delicious food?
Oh, yeah, always.
Right?
It's not a mistake.
What happens when you experience sexual pleasure, right? Right? When you can bring that into the experience of these stressful situations, you're reprogramming your brain and your stress response towards safety. And then the best part is telling them that their cold plunge is done.
Yeah.
And they've gone off into another place within themselves. And they're like, what? My time's up? I'm finished? I just got in. No, you've been in for 3 minutes and 35 seconds. You're good. And then the other part that I love getting the opportunity to witness is seeing people realize that they're a lot stronger than they give themselves credit for. That they're capable of so much.
Yeah. For people who don't have access to a cold plunge, is there a way they can replicate this at home?
Yes. So cold showers are a form of cold exposure.
So ending your shower with cold.
Ending your shower with cold. And I'm not talking mildly cold. I'm talking
crank that baby.
Make it as cold as it gets, right? Because I think usually taps are around like anywhere from 55 to 58 degrees. And then focus on your breath in the shower. Obviously, you have to rotate in the shower. You don't want the water to just be on one part of your body. Though I do strongly recommend that you have it hit your neck.
Okay.
To help kind of stimulate the response to the cold exposure. You can also dunk your face in a bowl of ice water. That's also a really profound form of cold exposure.
Every day in the summer.
Yeah. And then you can also, do what I did during the pandemic, which, I became very good friends with the local 7-Eleven
ice machine.
Yeah. The guy knew what I was coming in for. He's like, I got the ice for you today, and turn your bathtub into a cold plunge. There's actually, pretty affordable tubs out there that are like pop-up tubs. I think they cost around $200. There's, the whole spectrum of cold plunge tubs that go up to very high ranges.
Yeah. There's the
also
lay down.
Circulator.
Yeah. I was just going to ask, there's the lay down and then there's the squat down. Which do you think work better? Does it matter?
That's up to personal preference.
Yeah. Cause I hate the lay down.
The jury is out on, there's some people that I think make unfounded claims around, which one is better. The science doesn't support that. It's really up to personal preference. I have a Morosco Forge, which is a lay down.
Yeah.
Tub.
I hate the lay down. I've only done cold plunges where you're sinking straight down in it, but except when I was in Iceland, then I was doing sauna and then jumping into the lake, but the lake was not deep enough. So you had to lay down. And I was like, I hate this so much.
Yeah.
It may only be because it was a different experience and I had adapted and had set my mindset to plunging down versus oh, you're laying down. You got to keep going and going and going. Maybe I needed more experience with it. I don't know. I should try more lay downs before I totally subscribe to hating them.
I think also people don't realize that when you cold plunge, I always tell our clients slow and controlled, no hesitation, right? So if you get into a cold plunge and you just stand there, it gives your brain more time to send the signals of oh my God.
I will also say as a woman, I've got to get past my breast as soon as possible.
You have to.
Because the way, and I think,
it makes your nipples hurt.
Everybody, that has ever been cold knows that the contraction that happens with the areola and the nipples, you have to get past that as soon as possible. And for people who are listening, if your nipples ever get you get cold and they get really hard and painful and maybe they even start to turn lighter in color, that can be a sign of Raynaud's. And Raynaud's is a contraindication for cold plunging. But often I don't think we talk enough about it. For women, it's not just fingertips and toes. Your nipples can have that Raynaud's response where you get such a contraction of the blood vessels, you're not getting blood flow, and that pain is tissue dying. Like, we don't want that.
Yeah, we definitely don't want that. There's absolutely, in situations where there's contraindications, might not be a good idea to do.
Let's talk about that, though. What are contraindications to cold plunging?
Untreated cardiovascular disease.
Oh, definitely. Yes. I'm so glad you brought that one up.
Yeah. I think, especially in the cold plunging world, there are charlatans out there that want to ignore the evidence. And that's an example of an unsafe situation. People with Raynaud's syndrome should not cold plunge. People who are pregnant in the first trimester should not cold plunge, though you can after.
But modified, correct?
Modified, yeah, shorter.
Yeah, because there are often women who will be like, I do keto, I do this, I do that, I'm going to do it while I'm pregnant. And I think it's really important for people to understand that pregnancy is not a neutral health state. It's one of the most stressful periods of your life because your blood volume's expanding. There is a great need for the cardiovascular system to adapt. The kidneys have to adapt. Like, there are all of these changes, but also to keep in mind that if you're already under chronic stress in your life, adding more stress can cause those epigenetic changes in the fetus's development. So that's where I'm like working with someone who has expertise, who's running a clinic, who is making sure that things are safe. Because we put out a cold plunge article and we got hit back from people being like, this is perfectly safe in pregnancy. And I'm like, who are you to say this? Like, no, like, this is not a time to be cold plunging. Like you said, second and third trimester, I mean, it can, even just doing your feet can help significantly with like swelling and things
the
like that.
lymphatic flush that you need. Yeah.
There's modifications that can happen, but just to be like, no, pregnant women can do anything that anyone else is doing. I'm like, that's a great idea, but it's false.
People often overlook, and I had no idea until obviously I became pregnant, that it is one of the most stressful events on a woman's body.
Yeah.
Ever, right? Like, cardiovascularly, they say it's the equivalent of running a marathon a day or something like that.
But we treat women just like you should get over childbirth and having a baby, and you're done at 6 weeks. You're totally healed.
Oh, good God. That is like I mean, I had so much naivety going into my postpartum phase. I had a difficult pregnancy in that I don't think my body was made to be pregnant. My belly never actually popped. I didn't start showing until I was 7 months.
I mean, no, that's you. If you have a long torso, I have a long torso.
I actually have a short torso.
Oh, do you?
But I have a very strong abdominal wall. But where did my baby go? He went down. So when you were talking about, pelvic floor challenges, I actually couldn't exercise. I've been an athlete my whole life. The most I could do was walk because I felt like I had been kicked in the groin. And they were like, oh, it's just round ligament pain. And, I'm like, this can't be normal.
Yeah.
And my hip hurts so bad. And then, going into labor, I was in labor for 31 hours and I think I pushed for 4 hours. And, didn't realize that part of the reason why my labor was so painful was because my psoas was tearing during my contractions. And so, I tried to have a natural birth. I was unable to do so because I couldn't get over the pain.
Yeah.
I was in such horrific pain. I don't think I've ever screamed like that in my life, that my body couldn't relax for me to dilate to deliver my baby. And I ended up having to have an epidural. It was either an epidural or a C-section. And so I had the epidural and, once it wore off after I gave birth, the residual pain I had in my hip where I couldn't walk. And they're like, oh, it's fine. It's just because you had a long night. And for up to 1 year, I was in horrific pain. I couldn't understand why, I was like, I'm postpartum, like I should be fine. I should be okay. I should be back to normal. And it wasn't until I saw, this amazing doctor, in the Bay Area. She also has a clinic in Los Angeles, who did a special kind of ultrasound. And she said, Meliza, your psoas looks like a moth ate through it.
Oh gosh.
And that's why you're in pain.
Mm-hmm.
You have multiple tears and you need therapy to repair that.
Mm-hmm.
And then of course having, a good quality pelvic floor therapist. I think I might take the cake for the amount of referrals I send her, because I get so many women who, come to me, especially as they're entering into the menopausal years, where there may be some incontinence, developing, or, some people develop pelvic pain out of the blue where they're like, I've never had this before. And now this is a thing. And why is this hurt?
Yeah.
I feel so tense. I can't enjoy sex anymore with my husband. And it's like, okay, you need to go see a pelvic floor therapist. And of course, that should be normalized.
Yeah, I'm going to link to the episode we did with Dr. Deanna, who's a pelvic floor physical therapist, and she actually brought in her models to teach everybody about the pelvic floor and what they can be doing for that, because it is super, super important. I want to finish on the contraindications. So we talked about Raynaud's, we talked about pregnancy, we talked about cardiovascular disease, or just cardiovascular issues altogether. That's a really big bucket there, because it's not just that you've had a heart attack. Like, there can be a lot of other things going on.
Yeah, if you have arrhythmias, if you have, any form of atherosclerosis, some people will go as far as considering high blood pressure to be a contraindication for it. So you really want to make sure that those things are in check, and also talk to your doctor about it and make sure that that's a safe thing for you.
Yeah.
Hopefully you have a doctor that's informed about these practices and values their health in that way. But, those are the contraindications that I really look out for.
I would also add, if you have very painful periods.
Yeah.
Don't cold plunge on your period. Yeah. It's something where people, like, I've seen men on the internet, that's usually where they go and misbehave, when they tell women, like, it's just period cramps, like, get over it, like, you need to do it anyways. And I'm like, let me put a TENS unit on you, baby, and let me give you a dose of period pain. Like, let me in, because you've never experienced this. And so for people listening, if you look at Chinese medicine is just one example of many practices and cultures who are like, you keep the womb warm when you are postpartum and when you are on your period.
Yes.
And I will say, if you follow that, I mean, in Mexican culture, it's the same way. Lots of cultures have this.
In Algerian culture.
There's a reason for it. Respect the wisdom of the wise women.
Yeah.
You don't need science to validate that this is just not a good move for you.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because this leads me into the point of, there's 2 points I want to make around that. One is, if you are in a heightened state of stress, of prolonged stress, and you're coming to Worthy and we're doing a consultation with you, I'm not going to recommend you do a cold plunge. I'm going to focus on building up your parasympathetic rest and digest before I expose you to another stressor. Just because someone told you it's good for you doesn't mean it is.
Yeah.
Right?
Or it's good for you in this moment.
Right. And you should do what feels right for you. You have all the answers that you need, and you should not be looking outside of yourself for that. And this is, one of the challenges of our medical system, right? That has pathologized a lot of things, but also gaslit a lot of people, and especially women. I've had countless instances in my life where I say I saved my own life.
Yeah.
Because I knew something was very wrong. the other thing I want to talk about is cycle syncing and understanding when to expose your body to those stressors, right? The luteal phase and the menstrual phase are not the time.
No, our stress resiliency is lower.
It goes down.
Which is why people are more annoying during that phase. It's why...
Yeah, your amygdala is overactive, right? You can't regulate your emotions. You know, and then of course you get into the second half of the luteal phase and you're facing PMS. Like, you know, next thing you know, your husband is someone that you don't really care for.
Yeah.
Right? And so your stress resilience goes down, and that goes down with your estrogen levels going down. So you want to make sure that you're dosing that stress at the right time. And when your estrogen is highest, that's when you're going to want to be doing the intense workout, the intense strength training, the cold plunging, you're also going to be feeling yourself. So you're probably going to want to have sex more and, be more in your body and more active, right? When we think about the different variations in women, right? Some women are okay cold plunging or doing those stressful activities at any point in their cycle. If that is you, God bless you. That's not me. And I would also argue that timing those things in the day also makes a huge difference. Understanding that cold plunging can have a drastic effect on your core body temperature, right? It lowers your core body temperature. And so your body's at, 98.6 degrees. You're lowering your core body temperature significantly. And then your body almost overcorrects to warm itself back up. Now, if you do that too late in the day, what's going to happen?
Yeah, I was also just thinking of all of you that have hot flashes and night sweats. Do not do this at night. You're absolutely correct, because it's something that in the winter, which feels counterintuitive, will encourage people to be doing these cold plunges because it will actually warm your body up before you go outside.
So what you need to fall into deep sleep is a 2 to 3 degree temperature drop in your core body temperature. If your body's still in the phase of overcorrecting, you're going to be hot. And what happens when you get hot? You wake up. And I've personally had this experience where I'm howling at the moon, and I'm up for 2, 3, or I'm just up, 2, 3 hours, or I'm up for the rest of the night, starting at 3 a.m. I personally like to cold plunge in the morning, because it also helps with the fluctuation of cortisol throughout the day, which also can support your hormone cycles. Now, with heat exposure, I like to do the saunas in the evening because it prepares your body for deep rest. One way it does that is through the parasympathetic activation, but also through manipulating your core body temperature. When you overheat the body, right, your body is going to overcorrect to cool itself down. And what do you need to fall asleep? You need that temperature drop. So it's going to prepare you for bed. Why do we give babies a warm bath before they go to sleep, right? It's what helps them slip into that deep sleep. Turns out, we're just children in adult meat bags, and we still have a lot of the same needs.
Yeah.
So we should grant ourselves that.
So people should forget the morning routine, I've heard you say, and focus instead on the nighttime routine for restful sleep and nervous system regulation. You've given us a few tips, but what else can people do in the evening to really support their nervous system?
Find opportunities for co-regulation.
Okay.
So something that Peter Levine, who is, he created this method called somatic experiencing. He was really integral into my becoming trauma-informed and helping heal myself. But, a very critical component is healthy relationships, social connection, and healthy co-regulation. So snuggle your kid,
Or your puppy.
Or your puppy.
Well,
or your
and I just want people to understand, your dog could be 16. I'll still call them a puppy.
Yeah. Have a scheduled, a conversation with someone you love. Call your mom. Tell her you love her. Mm-hmm. If that's not accessible to you, consume information that reinforces that. Where you get the opportunity to bear witness to people doing good things, to people expressing kindness towards each other, and love. That the essence of this life for me is to love and be loved. I know it's cliche, but I've had enough experiences in my life. I was a very sick child, actually. And my life was actually in danger as a teenager. And it became very, very apparent to me that that was the most important thing. So when we can have experiences and observe things that reinforce that, it creates safety and downregulation in the nervous system. And that comes back down to the boundaries, right? Like making the choice to consume things. If your social media feed is not filled with things that bring you joy and make you feel good about yourself, that increase the worthy quotient, if you will, block it. Or if you can't, mitigate your consumption, delete the app. See what that feels like, right? So I think healthy co-regulation. Then I also love to do a little bit of breath work. I'm big on increasing accessibility. Part of my mission at Worthy is, and doing right by the word worthy, is everybody's born worthy of feeling good. That's not a privilege that is reserved for those with, tons of resources or of a certain socioeconomic status. That's something that we should all be able to experience. And I think that a lot of health practices have been kind of, there's gatekeepers. Yeah. And I'm deeply disturbed by that. There's no reason why an infrared sauna session should cost you $130 for 30 minutes. That's ridiculous. Yeah. So I personally offer a lot of free tools to people through breath work, through movement, nervous system friendly movement based classes.
Is this at your studio or online?
Both. So at my studio, we have a tiered program. So if it's within your capacity to pay full price for our services, then you pay full price. We have a sliding scale program for folks who earn income but can't necessarily afford the full price of our services. Most of the people that are on those programs are people like social workers, new therapists, public school teachers, right? People that are, in my opinion, grossly underpaid and often under-resourced. And then lastly, we also have a 501c3 nonprofit called Worthy Wellness Initiative. And this was actually really inspired by my mom. My mom was in the public service system where, she was a Medicaid recipient. She lived in Section 8 housing, and I would often go to her appointments with her. My mother passed away 5.5 years ago of cancer. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. And thank you. And I would go with her to her appointments, and I'd look around the room, and it's, often a room full of immigrants who are underserved. And they're just cogs in the machine. The system does not exist to serve their humanity first and foremost, let alone their health. And I was really disturbed by that. And so when I conceived of the idea for Worthy, I thought about, and I've been in this boat myself, right? when I first became a single mom, I was really struggling and dealing with serious, situation where my mom is dying.
Yeah.
I'm caretaking for her. I have a toddler. I have a full-time job. I'm overstressed and sick and burnt out. And I also can't afford these services that I really need. And that seems so unfair. So the Worthy Wellness Initiative offers a free membership to folks who meet the criteria. And if you're on 2 social service programs or more, and you can show that you're an active recipient, we don't do income verification because, again, I'm committed to our humanity. And I think that the process and dignity, I think that the process of the income verification that takes place in those programs is utterly shameful. And I've seen many people I care for go through that process, and it's dehumanizing. So as long as they show that they're active recipients, then they get a free membership at Worthy. And it's folded into how the business works. As the business grows, that membership pool grows. And I find that a greater indicator of inequality is socioeconomic status. And so we see people from all walks of life. We have a lot of folks with chronic autoimmune conditions that have, wreaked havoc on their lives. We have some people that don't speak any English, and thankfully we have a very multilingual staff and we're able to meet their needs. And it helps kind of level the playing field. Oftentimes the people that need these services the most are the most underserved. And so that's part of our dedication to helping ensure that everyone understands that they are worthy of feeling this way. And taking time for that self-care. It's not indulgent. It's absolutely necessary and paramount to your well-being. And there should be no guilt. It's a shame-free environment.
Yeah. Well, thank you for all the work that you are doing in this world and for taking the time to share your expertise with us today.
Thank you.
I'm very grateful that we got to have this time together.
Me too. Thank you so much.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. If this is the kind of content you're into, then I highly recommend checking out this.